Hi everyone, this is Claire. This episode, the sound isn't as good as usual, but we wanted to share the episode with you anyway. Fear not, next week we will be back to regular audio quality. And now, on to the show. Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. We are tenure-track faculty members in the sciences, working at a primarily undergraduate university in California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss. Hello, this is the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. I'm Claire.
And I'm Ruth, and today we're going to talk about getting a job. But first, before we do that, Claire, how was your week?
My week, it was good. One thing I wanted to say was, I think recently you had an expression where you said a kettle of fish. That's a whole other kettle of fish. And then right after you said that, and you were kind of like, is that an expression? We were watching Bones, and one of the characters, Booth, said a kettle of fish. And I was like, oh, it was a phrase. Ruth was right.
That is very reassuring, because sometimes in this weird hybrid when you live in a different country...
Oh, sure.
Sometimes I say things and I'm like, is that an Irish expression? Like, I can't remember. Like, am I just making up random things and claiming they're Irish? And so, yeah. Okay, that's very reassuring. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome.
I used to always I used to say happy as a clam. And everyone was like, okay, thank you. Because, like, all these people I interacted with are like, you are crazy. You're making that up. And then I read it in a book and I, like... was like victorious and so happy. So I'm happy about this one too. But yeah, thank you.
Good.
That is good.
Yeah, you're welcome. How was your week?
Is that your main reason?
That was my announcement for my week, yeah.
I like it. My week was okay. Yeah. I think I'm definitely feeling optimism about the end being on the horizon. Like, not the actual end, like the end of the semester being on the horizon. So that feels, positive. And
yes,
definitely I have discovered that I am getting Zoom headaches.
Oh, interesting. A new thing.
I'm sitting like trying to perch on one corner of my bed where you can't see the fact that my room, like, there's laundry everywhere and stuff, so it's not ergonomically optimal, I think. And I think I had my laptop on my lap, so I was kind of looking down, and so Zoom headache. Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
It's kind of like ergonomics seems like such a hilarious thing now when people are like perching in the weirdest places trying to teach.
Right.
All those days where we were like having standing desks and stuff. Yeah, a thing of the past. But anyway, yes.
Yeah. I'm always doing funny things with the lights because, depending on how much light's coming in the window, I might need my lamp or the overhead or like neither. And so before I turn on Zoom, I'm always running around trying to make the lighting work. Okay.
Because I had a research group meeting and I just felt like I was getting creepier and creepier because like it was getting darker and there was just this one, I was like underlit and like I looked like I was in the Blair Witch Project or something. So it was getting very strange. But yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah. The things we have to think about. I saw some like thing on the interweb somewhere and it was like how to look, your best on Zoom and how you don't have a double chin. And I was like, oh my gosh, like if I can just not look like I'm in a horror movie, that will be enough. Yeah. So I think I'm doing the quote this week. Okay, and I'm doing is one of my favorite professors, who's Indiana Jones. But it is
good one.
I know, it's good. I think you might have even written it on the list and I just poached it. I don't know. But it's from maybe not my favorite Indiana Jones movie, but still not my least favorite either. So it's Temple of Doom. And it is where Short Round asks him, what is Shankara? And he says, fortune and glory, kid, fortune and glory. And I thought that was very appropriate for today's episode about getting a job.
Totally.
Yeah.
Fortune and glory.
And this is a weird one because the what works for us, I guess it did work for us, right?
Right.
Because we did it.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking about that too. And what we're working on, like I'm not currently applying for jobs, so I'm not working on it. But I kind of was thinking... Well, I guess we'll get to it, but it's kind of analogous maybe to applying for tenure, and so I was trying to think of
it is
analogous things.
It's like the first step on the tenure applications.
Oh, that's true.
Ooh.
Yeah. So anyway, let's start with what's working though. What has worked or is working for you with getting a job? Well, wait, before we say that actually, so we are both tenure track faculty at a primarily undergraduate institution. So our experience is with that kind of getting a job, but hopefully some of it is useful for other contexts as well.
Oh, yeah. And I think a lot of this stuff is really applicable for lecturing positions too.
Totally. That makes sense. Cool. Okay, yeah. So what has worked for you for getting a job?
So one thing I really wanted to share that was important for me, I guess maybe a little bit about my career progression too, because I think we have kind of different stories.
Oh, yeah. Good idea.
So I went to graduate school straight after undergrad, and I was like a little baby when I did that. And I emigrated to America to do that, and I got quite sick. I got Lyme disease, but I didn't know it at the time. And I left and went back to Ireland and then got better. But by that stage, I had a husband. So I stayed in Ireland. This is a longer story that I meant to tell, but anyway, here I go. And then so I did my PhD in Ireland, and I was kind of older when I did that. Like I felt like I used to call myself the office granny because I was like older than everyone else who's doing it. And then I got a job lecturing over here in America. By over here, sorry, I mean in America. And then I got a job. So I worked there for 3 years, and then I got my tenure track job where we are now. Cool. And so one thing that really helped me was this person, Karen Kelskey, has a blog called The Professor Is In.
Ooh, yes.
And it is amazing. And I bought her book, and her book is amazing. And some of it feels like a little bit different because it's generally about arts kind of jobs. And so there's definitely different things there. Also kind of terrifying, the kind of things they have to do. And people have to publish a book and stuff. And anyway, that was a whole other terrifying thing. But a lot of her things were relevant, certainly, I think, for R1 universities. And so that was really helpful. And I think the biggest thing I would say that helped me was there was a person who I was friends with who had worked where I was as a lecturer and then had this sort of whole strategic plan to get a tenure line job. And she really kind of instilled in me the need for that kind of strategy and not just sitting around and waiting to see what jobs came up, like kind of going into like a full-fledged operation.
I love it. So, yes.
Yeah, and I think something that she said, and then also this Professor Is In book said, is taking your time to craft a teaching statement, research statement, and letter. And so I kind of did a strategic, we paid for a nanny for a summer, like to come for a few hours a day, look after the kids. I would go into work and I was kind of doing some research stuff, but primarily preparing these application materials. And I took that really, really seriously. And I think that's something that I've definitely noticed in people who end up with jobs. Is doing that and not thinking and I think the woman in the book really talks about this, like it's not just something you can throw together the night before,
right?
And it's not just an afterthought, like your PhD and stuff, like this is your one kind of shot to make this impression on people. And so that was really, and I kind of got over myself and got a lot of people to read it, give me feedback about it, so that I think was huge. I think another thing that my friend told me that was really interesting was she had gone on a few interviews and she said, make a pretend research budget. And I was like, what are you talking about? I don't even know what I'm doing. I can't make a pretend research budget. But then I did it and I just Googled furnace. Like that's something I need for my thing. And just had written down a number and nobody knows. They don't know if it's crazy town. You know what I mean? Like, you can, because I was like, what do you mean? But I'm going to get caught out. Like, I don't really know what I'm talking about. But, so it actually really helped me, even when it didn't come up in an interview, knowing that I had that made me feel like I was more prepared.
Yeah. And even if you felt like it might not be super accurate number, it was a better number than, you had researched the numbers and came up with them somehow. So
and I think that this other person had told me, like, they were in the middle of an interview, and I think the way they described it, it was clear they weren't going to get this job. And so the person kind of decided to be quite frank with them. And they were like, look, it's kind of clear you haven't sort of thought this through. And so maybe just the process of showing that you have thought it through is useful. And then this person also did like a Skype interview with me. And it was kind of
as
funny.
As a practice.
Because I was doing one for this job. And it was kind of funny because when she did it, she was like, just so you know, like I can see the Frozen poster in the background, because my daughter used to, like, she stuck it up in my office and I just left it there. And so I was like, yes, I will move the Frozen poster before my actual interview. So that was really good. And then, sorry, I'm doing a whole fire hose of advice. The other one was, don't be cheap.
Okay.
And so I think because you know how you feel kind of inadequate when you go for these things. And I was like, yeah, like if when they ask you about research money, if you kind of make it seem like you're going to be really inexpensive, that's going to make them want to hire you. And like, that's completely, now I'm on the other side. I'm like, that is not remotely relevant. It's not remotely attractive, like in terms of hiring you, because that sort of money stuff happens outside of the department. Like they don't care what kind of money you're talking about for research. And so that was something too.
Interesting. Yeah. I love all of that. I agree wholeheartedly about the crafting statements and really spending time on them. And I also, you know, I went to the Career Center at my graduate place and had them read them and stuff. And my parents and Ralph all helped with them. And it was, that makes a huge difference. I agree, really crafting them. It seems like it reminds me of something. I think I learned this from my parents, the idea that you have to make it really clear that this job is a good match for you and that you are a good match for the job. And just like that is your entire goal. And so, by really tailoring them and crafting them well.
And I struggle with that because I struggle with, it feels really embarrassing to be like, yes, and I think I'd be a great match to work with Professor so-and-so because I also, but I think you're right. Like it's so apparently clear to people when someone is just firing off like 100 applications and they do not care about your place specifically. And even if it feels like sucking up or like, it's so important.
Totally.
And I think the other thing that I did that I was happy about is I kind of made it this sort of practice of looking at all the job listings. I had a spreadsheet. I would put it in there. I would put in the application date. The other thing I did, and maybe this is my own sort of inadequacies, but I also looked up the ranking of the university.
Okay.
To make it clear what I was like shooting at here. Do you know what I mean? Because especially maybe not growing up in America, there's a lot of schools I've never heard of.
Sure.
And I have no idea where they sort of fall. Do you know what I mean? And I guess honestly, if something was like, sorry, there's a dog shouting outside my window, but if it was something like way, way out of my league, I wasn't going to spend a huge amount of time on it. So, yeah. So
did you know, like you had narrowed it down to teaching focused universities, or did you know? Yes, I knew primarily because I never did a postdoc. And I just, so when I was at grad school over here in America, sorry, I'm like over here, and kind of seeing the lifestyle of the professors who were working was so extreme. Yes. And I'm not saying, like, if people are able for that, I salute you, but I honestly, and I don't know if this is actually true or if it's just true for me, but I could not imagine having kids and doing that job. Like, I can't even imagine having my job and having kids at the moment, but even though you do. But none of it is smooth and it's really rough. But so I really remember there was only one female professor in my department when I was there, and I remember she came back to work like 3 days after she gave birth, and I remember being like, I just haven't got the whatever that is and the kind of drive and sort of energy for that. I do not have it. So I think that was part of it. And then also I think, I don't know. I just felt like that wasn't even a possibility for me because I do not have a super strong research sort of portfolio. And I definitely, as you heard in the tenure episode, like I'm very angstful about getting tenure and I can't imagine what it's like at one of those schools. So and then also I think, the school that I was in grad school in, like those lectures were 200 people big. And I think there is people who can really teach effectively that way, but I do not think that's me. And so I think having the smaller class sizes was really appealing. Totally. And I like it. Yeah, me too. I also had completely decided primarily undergraduate institution was what I wanted. And for me, it was, if I was going to teach, I wanted to focus on teaching and be sure that I could teach really well. And so I wanted to be in a department that also valued that really highly, and where that could be my primary focus. And the smaller classes, where we can get to know the students individually and stuff, that's what I was going for as well. And especially at a primarily undergraduate institution where I could focus on teaching but still have some support to do research as well. That was the perfect balance that I was looking for.
Totally. So tell me, what worked for you?
Well, one of the things that I found interesting was the benefits of interviews. And so my kind of history is I went straight from grad school to my current position, so I also didn't do a postdoc. And so I interviewed at a place that I ended up not going to, or not being hired for. And during that interview, I kind of learned that I didn't actually want that job. Oh. I didn't really know it until I was there. But as I was there interviewing, it was kind of confusing mentally, too, because I was like, okay, but still focus on the interview. I actually got some really good advice from, like the night before, I was emailing one of my undergraduate faculty who was really helpful and supportive. Her name is Rachel Austin. And she said something like, now is not the time to think about whether you want this position or not. Just go through the interview and see what you think afterwards. And so I went through the interview, and through the interview I learned that, it was an interesting place, and I had applied to it for a reason, and it did seem like a pretty good match, but when I was actually there, it just wasn't quite what I was looking for. They kind of had a chemistry department that was a support role for other departments. They didn't really focus on it, and so anyway, it just wasn't a great match. So I was really interested to learn that interviews are useful, of course, one, for learning if you like that particular place, and also, two, for kind of refining an understanding of what attributes you're looking for, because I didn't even know that that was something I cared about until I was there and felt kind of like it was missing,
Dude, this is so true, because it's like that thing that when you're in that when I'm in that sort of fearful position, I'm like, please like me. And you kind of forget that maybe you're actually interviewing them too. And
totally.
That, and you're right, because you don't know what you don't like until you're in the middle of it. You're like, oh, this isn't for me. Yes.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, another benefit of interview is that it's practice for whichever interview ends up working out, So, all the practice I got at this one place that they ended up not hiring me, and I don't think I would have taken it anyway, like, but I still got lots of practice.
I didn't want to go there anyway.
I know, right? But it was really good practice for, the place that I ended up really wanting.
That's super cool. That's really, and, sorry, I'm like going back to another thing. I'm just taking over back over to
it's
me.
great.
It's sort of something you said there brought it up in my head. It's like that sort of authenticity, and like sometimes if you get caught up in trying to impress people, it can be. So I really remember, like, for about 2 seconds, I sort of considered when I went for the interview up here, maybe not telling them that I had kids. And you hear that weird thing about like, take off your wedding ring or something. And, and then I was like, man, and someone else said it to me, like, if they were the kind of people who wouldn't hire you because you had kids, you probably don't want to work there. Like, that is not going to be a good match for you. And I think
that's a good point.
Just that overall idea of like something being a good match for you is super important.
Yeah.
Like, not just I'll take anyone who'll have me kind of thing, but like
totally
being sort of discerning in what you actually want.
Right. Totally. I think that makes a lot of sense. That kind of reminds me of what you were saying about startup funding, and kind of, in general, the R1s would have more startup funding and the PUIs would have less startup funding. So that's kind of a what do you need scenario. And so I remember one of the interview questions for the job that I have was something like, what kind of startup do you need? Yeah. And I remember, luckily it was a question they gave me in advance because I hadn't thought to prepare it. And I remember thinking, gosh, I don't really feel like that's a deciding factor for me. Like, I don't want to give a big number if that's going to scare anybody off. And I don't actually feel like I need the big number, but I could use it. So I kind of gave, like, well, if it was this number, this is what I could do. And if it was this number, this is what I could do. And I felt like that kind of, if it was a deal breaker for me and I needed the large number, then that would be worth saying. But in this case, I didn't feel like it was a deal breaker, but I wanted them to know that I could use a variety of amounts,
Wow, I really like that. And then it's clear if they're like, okay, well, we can only give you like $200 or something. You'd be like, okay, well, you're going to get the bargain basement research. And
right,
that's what
exactly.
You're gonna get. But I like that. And I think one thing, now I'm just like getting rolling. I'm super excited about giving people unsolicited advice about applying for jobs. I'm like, yeah. But, I think I was on the receiving end of job applications for like a lecturer position. And I think... So this is a whole story. I'm going all in. But
all right, great.
When I was in grad school in America, one of the professors kind of gave us this seminar, and it was kind of amazing because when I first came here, I didn't understand there was a difference between R1 and primarily undergraduate institutions. It just wasn't clear to me what the distinction was. Mm-hmm. But he gave this talk about basically, listen, you guys are not going to probably be teaching at R1 universities. And literally people were like falling apart. Like people were nearly bursting into tears. They were like, what do you mean? And he was like all of the professors who are at this university are from like Harvard and MIT. You guys are at a, lower, I'm doing air quotes, ranking university. So you're not going to be going further. You're not going to go and be a professor at Caltech or something. And people were really cut up about it. And he also said, if you're planning on going to a 4-year university, don't just assume that's your backup plan. Like, you need to be strategically preparing for that now. It's not, you know what I mean? And it's really interesting seeing letters that are not crafted for a primarily undergraduate institution. Or like someone was telling me about an interview they did where the person just kept talking about their research space and wouldn't answer any teaching questions and was kind of talking about all these conferences they had to attend. And it was just so clear that they had no interest in teaching.
Right.
And so it's
not
just
a good match.
Right. And to kind of pay attention to, it needs to be different. Like, you need to have a different application strategy for,
totally.
If you're going to apply to both, it cannot be the same application set.
Yeah. Totally. Crafting the statements.
Yeah.
That's a good one. And do you think that's true? I'm trying to think of an example. But, I'd be surprised if you could not get a tenure track position at an R1 without going to one of those big schools. I bet if you really worked at it, you could make it happen.
Oh, I'm sure it can happen. I think it's just that he was trying to kind of correct, like, some people and like a lot of people go to grad school thinking, I'm going to go and be the head of NASA or whatever. And,
I see.
Maybe that is true and you might do that, but you have to be hustling from the minute.
Yeah, you
it's
got to
not
be
like
going for it.
You're just going to roll through. And I actually had a really interesting conversation with someone a while ago where they were talking about how they applied for a community college job and they didn't even get an interview. And when they called the person, they kind of called for feedback and said, hey, do you have any feedback? And the person was like, 10 years ago, we would have just like grabbed you with both hands. Like, we would have been so delighted. But they said the job market has changed and we have applicants who are applying from Harvard and all of these places. And so, I think the job market has changed. And I've definitely talked to some people who are kind of like, well, look, I got a PhD, so therefore I just got to roll into this job here. And it's not like that anymore. And I think that's something the book really highlights is like, this is not, what I don't know when those times were, but whatever times it was that you could just get a PhD and walk into a job, that is not the case anymore.
And so therefore you must really craft your application and craft your credentials to really fit with
right. And like, maybe if you're
for.
still in grad school, like finding opportunities to sort of put those things in your CV.
Yes,
like
totally.
If you have an opportunity to mentor undergrads and make that clear, or if the only, and there's nothing wrong with this, but if the only teaching experience you have is grading for a TA, maybe you want to try and get an experience where you're the head tutor in a lab or whatever. But just kind of being mindful of like anytime there's an opportunity for something that could look good in that future application, sort of saying yes to that.
Totally. That makes lots of sense.
So what thing would you be working on?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I've kind of tried to think of it as, what am I working on with my tenure packet that also applies to the job applications? And I think it's getting all the information possible. And that, of course, relates to being able to tailor your application to fit the job well. And so a story that I have about that is when I applied for this job that I have currently, I talked to one of the people on the hiring committee about kind of what they were looking for. We had a phone call just to get a little bit more information.
Nice.
Which ended up being incredibly helpful, because one of the things that I had heard in, the advice mill was that when you're doing your job interview and you're doing a demo teaching thing, you should not interact with the students. Because what if they don't respond because it's awkward because it's this teaching demo, and then it's going to look really bad if you can't engage them, so just don't set up a lecture where you're interacting with them. So that was the advice I'd heard. I thought, okay, that's what you're supposed to do. And the person that I talked to on the hiring committee was saying, well, one of the, when he was describing what they were looking for, a key, very critical part was being able to interact with the students. And so I would have gone in there and done completely the wrong thing, even though I'm the same person who actually does like to interact with the students. So I'm the same person, and I would have been doing the same thing in reality in the classroom, but I wouldn't have demonstrated that if I hadn't gotten that bit of information from him.
And that's so, obviously this is the only tenure line job I've gotten, so, but here especially, they are really, really focused on that. And I can imagine that might not be true everywhere.
Sure.
So, but it's really cool to get that relevant information about where you're going.
Yeah, so whatever, of course, digging through the website and the job, listing and all that, but if there's anybody you can talk to and just get a little bit of insight about, what they're looking for, that, it might just be really transformative information.
Yeah.
And also it helps decide whether it's a good match for you and that kind of thing, of course.
Right. And I think, and that sort of is I think getting being as tailored as possible to things is super cool. And just that you show that you cared enough to go and find out some things is really...
that's true. Yeah.
Because flattery, everyone wants to feel special, you know what I mean? And that's true when you're jaded and on a committee or something.
Totally.
Who's talked to 100 people.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
What about you? What would you be working on?
The thing that I feel I totally failed at in getting the job was negotiation.
Oh, gosh. Because how many options do you have to practice negotiations? Not that many.
The really frustrating thing is, anytime I talk to anyone about this, they're like, oh, well, you'll know for the next job. And it seems like everybody on their first go does a really bad job of negotiating. And then in the second one, but I don't want a second job. This is my forever job. I don't want to go anywhere. And maybe that's what they knew, and that's why they wouldn't negotiate. But I cannot believe, I remember asking the dean when they made the job offer, could I just have another week? And they were like, no, absolutely not. And I was like, okay, sorry. And then I got here and I heard about someone who took 3 months
to decide.
Yeah, and they came back for a couple of other visits. They brought their partner with them. And I was just like, oh my God, that was so far. I think I just really felt once you're on the inside, you can see how much effort and time goes into picking that top candidate.
Right.
It's not like they're going to be like, okay, if you irritate me slightly, you're going to get knocked off the top spot and I'm going to pick the next person. Because, and that's what it felt like when I was on the receiving end of the offer, was if I was any way difficult, they would just go to whoever number 2 was.
Right.
And then when you see it on the other side and how much time and effort goes into these searches and how expensive it is and how much, everything that went into you being the top person, it's not there's just someone just waiting in the wings. And you could definitely ask for more. And maybe, even financially, who knows? But there's so much stuff people ask for.
So much stuff people ask for. And what is possible varies so much by university. So it doesn't hurt to ask.
Right. And I think, it's my inherent, my deal is. I don't even know how I could qualify it, but trying to kind of make yourself small and be like, oh, like I'll work for less. Do you want to pay me less? Like, you know, and just like just being so
Totally.
And it's so, and you feel like people are not going to like you if you say, hey, well, you know, and like I've heard about people in our place who are being paid substantially more than we are, you know, because they were able to do that, or they got extra release time, or they got whatever. And so,
how interesting. Because, yeah, I asked for a lot of those things and it didn't work out. So what, I mean, I did end up getting more startup funding. That was the only thing I asked for that happened.
I think one thing is true. It can depend year to year. It seems vastly different what year you were hired. And I think you didn't drag it out for 3 months. Do you know what I mean? Maybe if you had, you know what I mean?
That's true. I wonder if you asked for the extra week, like when they were already having trouble with this person who dragged it out for so long, and they were like, no, we can't start that again.
I know. They were like, never again. We're not going down this path again. But the thought of even asking for like another flight to come back and like, oh, I want to come visit again. And that was just so alien to me that was even an option.
Yeah, it didn't occur to me either, because Ralph didn't even come up here and check it out beforehand, because we didn't have enough time in the amount of time they gave us. And no, it didn't occur to me to ask for that either.
Yeah, it's so weird. I just realized were we being interviewed around the same time?
Probably.
Yeah, you probably stayed in the same, like, you know, that little, did you stay in a super cute little cottage? Sorry, this is so not relevant.
Yeah.
I had a super weird interview day, because I was, you know, normally you come for 2 days. And this was where I was kind of like, am I going to tell them that I have kids? But I was still nursing, and so I couldn't go for more than 1 day or terrible things would happen.
Right.
And so I was only going to come for 1 night, and then my flight was delayed by 8 hours. So I was here for like 19 hours or something. Like I got in at midnight and I left at like 4 p.m. Like I can't do math, so I don't know how many hours that is, but it was such a whirlwind. It was so bizarre.
Wow. That's crazy.
Can I tell you one more thing that is something I would be working on?
Yes.
That is like to not extrapolate. Do you know what I mean? And so, well, 2 things. One is that someone told me once, sometimes you can see a job description and it's like it was written about you.
Oh, yeah.
And you can apply for it and you don't get it. But then there's ones that are not, but like you should just throw your hat in anyway, because you never know. And then the other one was, what was the other one? I've like confused myself now with that. The other thing is like, so the interview for here, I got a phone call about that straight away. And I was like, whoa, like I'm kind of hot property. Like I got this phone call and I applied to 20 schools and I don't think I heard back from like 18 of them. Do you know what I mean? And so definitely spread your net wide, because whatever it was about here, they were like, she's top of the pile or whatever, or somewhere in the top 10 or something. But other schools, I was nowhere remotely near the top. So it's like everywhere's looking for different things. And just because you didn't get a job in the first 15 places you applied to does not mean that's forever, or the reverse is true too.
Totally. And I want to add that it's worth it to apply to places even if it seems like it's a huge reach, you know?
Totally.
Because, yeah, why not? Just write the best application possible. Because I felt like there was no way I was going to get this job. And then I did. So you never know.
I know. And it's so weird to me that, like, you know, if I hadn't applied to here, my whole search would have been a complete failure. And maybe I wouldn't have tried the next year. And it's just so, you can't kind of extrapolate those data points.
Yeah, totally. The numbers are too, you don't have enough data.
No. And then I think the other thing I would say too is if people are struggling with getting a job, getting a lecturing position can be really helpful. And so that I think really helped me with applying for this job, because I was already at a primarily undergraduate institution. And then I know that wasn't true for you, so you know, it just depends, but I think it could kind of kickstart something.
Totally. That makes sense.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, thanks so much for this chat. That was super useful.
Yeah, we'll brush off the old job application materials.
I know.
To the next place.
Haven't looked at those in a little while.
Yeah. Yep. Well, that's great. Thanks so much, Claire.
Thank you, Ruth.
And thanks, Ralph.
Thanks, Ralph.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener, and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people you know if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.